What is up, everybody, and welcome to my review of Alex Garland's newest film, Civil War. Now, this is a movie that's been on my radar for quite a while. I've been really intrigued on what this was going to end up being. If I'm being completely honest, my biggest thoughts were fear of how political this thing was going to get, how overt it was going to get with its message, how heavy-handed things were going to be. And after I started to hear some of the early rumblings and had some people that I trust see the film that guaranteed me that it's actually shockingly apolitical, I got much more interested in the prospects of Civil War. So essentially what this movie is about is a snapshot in time in the middle of a civil war on the United States soil, where after a certain amount of division has gone through the nation, certain states have seceded from the Union, the United States is now broken up into territories, and you are following these journalists, these photographers, as they are traveling across the country to get to Washington, D.C. to get one last interview out of the President of the United States before the Western Alliance, which is California and Texas, we'll get into that, make their final assault on Washington, D.C., and pretty likely take this guy out. So it's a film that's exploring the importance of journalism, what journalism is supposed to be. It's certainly a send-up of war photographers and war journalism, where people have to put their lives literally at risk and be in the middle of battlefield to be able to present information and to document the things that are happening, all the while being very much a direct cautionary tale of where things could potentially head in this nation if we continue to go down this path of ultimate division, nobody wanting to talk, nobody wanting to find common ground, and everybody just believing everything that they read online. So starting off with the positives for Civil War, obviously with the name Alex Garland attached to it, you expect this to be a very well-made film, a very well-directed film, a film that utilizes its lower budget and still delivers top-notch visuals, and all of that is true here. Ex Machina and Annihilation are films that are really well done. Ex Machina especially is my favorite of his films. Men, I personally didn't care for. I felt like it was overly heavy-handed, didn't really get what that film was going for, but his filmmaking ability was still very much on display there. And here it continues to be that way. I mean, you have a war film here where you have a lot of explosions and you have gunfire and you have visuals of very prominent United States landmarks and, you know, places that most Americans would recognize that have this war-torn skin over it. Even the way that they utilize lighting in some of the nighttime war scenes, or in the third act specifically where there is this siege on Washington, D.C., it's a gorgeous looking movie. So for being such dark and pretty horrific subject matter and horrific visuals, even at that, for some reason it's one of those movies that you can't really take your eyes off of, and you're in awe of the visuals they were able to create throughout the entire runtime. The sound design in the movie is incredible, especially in regards to like gunshots and explosions. I mean, I've seen hundreds of action movies and, you know, comic book films and everything else where gunfire and explosions and all of the things they're going for here are much more glamorized. And I don't know how they do it. I don't know the science of sound design, but when you hear a gunshot or an explosion in this film, it is not a fun sound. It is not glamorized sound. It does not give any sort of excitement or any sort of amped up intensity for entertainment value. It just frightens you. Like, it just brings the whole tone of everything down, and it just has this very gritty, real quality to it, which I can't think of many movies, even war films, where that is the case. There's just something about the way that they utilize sound design here that just really hammers home the gravity of the situation and actively does not glamorize it one bit. Performance-wise, everybody here does a really good job, but specifically, I really liked what Kirsten Dunst did. Now, this is an actress that I've grown up with and seen her in things like Jumanji and Small Soldiers, of course, the Spider-Man films, and not to pretend like I've seen everything that she's done, but this is one of the most unique performances I've seen her give, because her character is very much this beaten down and emotionally numb journalist who has seen some shit. She has seen the Civil War and even things before that, that have just drained her of all of her emotional ability to like react to anything that she has seen. So all throughout the movie, she looks beaten, she looks tired, she looks numb to everything that's going on around her. There's a really interesting setup going on with her and the younger photographer, the amateur that they are taking along with her, where she very much sees a younger version of herself in her. And without really saying it overtly in the movie, you just look at her eyes and you see how she reacts to certain situations, and you can tell that she really doesn't want this young photographer to go along the same path as her and end up the same way that she is. And all of that information is given just by the facial expressions and the body language and the subtle acting of Kirsten Dunst. So I was really impressed with what she did in this one. There's also a number of sequences here that genuinely are tense. The one that everybody has been talking about and everybody will continue to talk about is the sequence with Jesse Plemons, where they descend upon these militia members or soldiers. I mean, the whole movie is pretty nondescript about whose alliances are what and what people believe in and what side they're on. So they just come across these two people dumping a bunch of bodies into the ground, and just a whole dialogue exchange between Jesse Plemons and these three characters just has you on the edge of your seat the entire time, just waiting for the tension to snap and things to go very wrong.
What kind of American are you? You don't know?
And what I appreciated a lot about this movie's approach is that it does remain very apolitical. It really is just a snapshot into this scenario and just lets you experience kind of the effects of war and experience what this could be like, this alternate future, hopefully an alternate future, and let you take away from it whatever you take away from it. I've seen a number of people that, especially on Twitter, of course, that get really upset that the fact that this movie does not choose a political stance or does not have more, overt satirical nods to direct people like Donald Trump or Joe Biden or anybody else. And to me, if you walk away from this film and that is your takeaway, you've completely missed the point. That is you wanting a film to validate your own personal biases, your own political views. You want the film to say your side is right, and if the side that is wrong does not open their eyes, then this is what's going to happen, because clearly they're wrong. That is the opposite of the point of this film, and I cannot say how relieved I am that that is the case, because God help us all if we walked into this movie and it took a hard stance on the left or the right, and just that would be such a mind-numbing conversation. I'm getting a headache just envisioning it right now. This is very much intentionally meant to be a film that does not pick sides, a film that does not say what side is right or wrong. It doesn't say what side caused the conflict, if one side in fact does. It doesn't say what the ideologies of all of these different little territories within the U.S. actually are holding on to. And aside from pretty overtly saying that Nick Offerman's president is basically a fascist that is taking more of a dictatorship run to this now war-torn U.S., it really doesn't make any hard stances on the government versus the people. It just shows you a version of what could happen if this nation goes into a civil war, and lets you look inside of it, see the horrors, see the tragedy, see the needless amount of death that would inevitably come from something like that, and just asks you to think about it. Just says, hey, what's your thoughts? What do you take away from this? Do you see this in your future? Do you see certain decisions that you're making, or certain things that you are doing in your everyday life, shutting people out or only arguing with people behind a keyboard, or what say you? Do you see that eventually leading to this? And how do you feel about that? And the tone and the approach that they choose to take in this film, for me, it very much harkens more to like a post-apocalyptic horror film than an actual war film. Only instead of zombies or, cyborgs from the future or a viral outbreak, it's just U.S. citizens turning their guns on each other. That is the basis for the apocalypse. So that was something that was really interesting to me. Of course, it is a war film. There are war sequences. There is explosions and gunfire and one side versus the other. But for me, the tone and the approach of the film leaned much more into post-apocalyptic type films. And so that very much kind of hammered home the message that they're going for me. And finally, I appreciated how subtle and yet effective some of the lines of dialogue was. It's a very well well-written film as far as the screenplay. And there's things in the trailer that you've seen, like Jesse Plemons' character, where they're like, hey, it's okay, we're Americans. And he goes, yeah, well, what kind of American are you? Or you have another scene where there's a sniper that have people pinned down in this little, this area in this field, and they come upon these people that are aiming their guns at the sniper and saying, so who's he? What side are you on? Why are you pointing your gun at him? Well, he's pointing his gun at me. Well, why is he trying to kill you? I don't know, but I'm trying to kill him. And it's just like this needless confusion of, I don't even know why I'm pointing my gun at this person. I'm just doing it because, I don't know, fuck it, it's Monday. Moving on to the mixed aspects, I gotta be honest, focusing primarily on journalism and on war photography really isn't a subject that I personally get into very much. Not to say that they do a bad job of it here. I get what they're going for. They do a good job of presenting it that way and having this be the eye that we get to see all of this through is through war journalism, but it's just not the side of this subject matter that they're exploring that I personally would be more interested in, and it's not really something that even completely comes together by the end of it to win me over to suddenly be really interested in the war journalism side of things. It's interesting how they use it to where in the middle of a civil war, journalism has been stripped down all the way to its base level where it should be, which is people that are unbiased and apolitical, just documenting what is going on, just presenting the facts and letting everybody take away whatever they take away from the facts, much like the approach of the film itself. So there's a layered approach there with how they're trying to hammer that home. And we all know, especially if you live in this country, that journalism is not that nowadays. It is not about presenting the facts and letting people make the decisions. It's about taking facts, sometimes taking opinions, sometimes taking complete bullshit and just putting information out there to try to sway people to certain sides or to try to get people to be influenced to do certain things or to think certain ways. It is not at all what journalism is supposed to be. So that side of it I enjoyed. That side of it I thought was interesting. I thought that, again, it was subtle and yet really well executed. But the notion of somebody walking behind active gunfire and grenades being tossed and next to full-on tank battles just to take pictures of what's going on, there's a part of the logic side of my brain that's just like, who the fuck would do that? Why are you doing that? And one character in particular, the young, more bold amateur photographer, like actively putting herself in the most dangerous and stupid situations just to get a picture. Something about that I never could completely get over as a viewer. And so I could never completely get onto the side of some of these characters. And when certain events happen throughout the film, I'm like, yeah, fuck it, you deserve that. What did you think was going to happen? So a little bit of the emotions and the sympathy that I think they were garnering for, I couldn't quite get there myself. And the other mixed element is that because this film does take such an apolitical stance, it actively gives you as little information as possible about this war, about how it kicked off, about how California and Texas ended up getting together, like two states that could not seem like they are further from political agreement, how those two joined up to be an entire territory, what the other territories believe in that made them latch into each other, what exactly happened with Nick Offerman as president. Was he president before the Civil War and then just stayed in office while the war-torn country was going on? Was this something that happened before he took office? Like, there's so many questions that are necessary to be answered to fully understand this movie's portrayal of the Civil War that it actively does not give you. And so there's a side of that that I understand, and there's a side of that that I appreciate, because I feel like the more details you give, the more answers you give, the more that you do end up taking some kind of a political stance or sending some kind of a message out there. Because inevitably, if you say, you know, these states got together and they kicked off the Civil War because of this disagreement, then people are automatically going to say, oh, well, that's a disagreement that the left would have, or that's a disagreement that the right would have, so they're the bad guys. And so it's difficult, and I understand that. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't walk out of this film actively frustrated at the lack of information that I had, because so many things about this war that were really interesting to me, I don't have any context for. And so it's an odd experience. And the final mixed element is the film's song choice. There are a couple of sequences here where the visual backdrop of what is going on, or the context of what is going on, is something very dark and bleak and horrific, but they put much more of an upbeat and jovial song choice in front of it. And so you have this intentional conflicting tone, almost to kind of reinforce people's apathy to what is going on, namely Kirsten Dunst's character, just like, yeah, this is the world we live in now. Isn't it crazy? Like, I get what they were going for in intentionally doing such a weird mix there. There was times that it worked better than others, but overall, I don't know if that fully came together for me. Maybe that was just a step too far into being cheeky. Moving on to the negatives, and this kind of goes along with what I was saying in the mixed about journalism. The main goal of this film, I never fully understood the context of why it was so important to these characters. Like, we have to be the person that gets an interview or gets a picture of the president before he's killed. I don't really understand what the value of that is, aside from just like a personal challenge or saying like, I was the one that got the picture, I went through all this bullshit. Again, it just leans into some of my own logic difficulties. I guess somebody that would never, ever be somebody who's willing to walk behind gunfire to get a badass picture. So that being the inciting incident and the main goal of the film, and going through all these horrors and atrocities as they go across the U.S., I never fully grasped the value of the end goal and why it merited everything that happened and all the people that die and everything that happens in the film. I was also very frustrated and dissatisfied with a decision that was made in the third act of the film. You know, there was, as I said earlier, to me, a very deliberate character arc set up between Kirsten Dunst's character and this amateur photographer, this young girl that they are bringing along with her, and her seeing herself in her. And the way that they decided to cap off the character arc and what's going on between those two characters in the third act, to me, just didn't work. I didn't understand really what the point of that was. I feel like you still could have had the ending that you were going for, and the tone and some of the bleakness of the reality of what is happening in the third act, and still paid off that character arc in a way that was a little more satisfying. And finally, I'm somebody who always values rewatch value in a film. That does play into how I grade it. The movies that are among my favorites of all time are films that I continuously rewatch, and this is just not one of those films for me. Like, it's interesting to see. I think it's worth seeing. I think that it's valuable to see for everybody, regardless what your political affiliation is, but it's not a movie that I could ever see myself re-experiencing. This is absolutely one of those films that I would categorize as appreciating more than I actually enjoy. So that's just going to come down to everybody's personal taste. I like what they did here, I value what they did here, but I don't need to re-experience it ever. So all in all, guys, I think this is going to be one of the more interesting films to check out, and especially to discuss this year. If you were like me and were worried about the political stances taken, it's not that type of film at all. It's actually much more valuable in that sense. So I'd encourage everybody to check it out if you're interested. But like I said, some things didn't completely come together for me. I'm not exactly enamored with it like a number of people are, but it was worth checking out. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all of my 2024 new release reviews. And I'm also going to put my newest show up here, Movie Brawl, for you to check out, where we discuss Terminator 1 versus Terminator 2. I've already got ideas brewing for a second episode, so definitely check it out. Like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.